You ever made a promise so bold that the entire world laughed at your audacity? As a 7-year-old village girl, she looked into the young prince's eyes and declared with absolute certainty, "When I grow up, I'll be your queen." His laughter echoed through her childhood nightmares for years. 12 years later, fate has thrust her into the royal castle as a simple lady-in-waiting, invisible, powerless, and forced to serve the foreign princess who will soon marry her childhood prince. But when their eyes meet across the grand hall, something unexpected flickers in the king's gaze. Recognition. As forbidden glances turn to secret meetings and whispered confessions, the countdown to the royal wedding becomes a dangerous game of passion versus duty, with kingdoms and hearts hanging in the balance. What happens when a king must choose between the crown he was born to wear and the love he never forgot? And what price must a servant girl pay for daring to reach beyond her station? The answers will shatter everything you thought you knew about true power, sacrifice, and the courage it takes to defy destiny itself. Her heart stopped beating for what felt like an eternity as the massive oak doors of the royal hall swung open. Eleanor stood frozen, her borrowed shoes suddenly too tight, her breath caught in her throat like a trapped bird. The grand hall stretched before her, a sea of crimson carpets, flickering torches, and nobility draped in silks and jewels. But it was him who made her blood run cold. The king. The same boy who, 9 summers ago, had laughed at her childish declaration under the village oak tree. "When I grow up, I'll be your queen," she had told him, her 7-year-old voice clear and determined. His royal chuckle still echoed in her nightmares. Now, at 19, she was nothing but a lady-in-waiting, invisible among the servants, while he sat radiant upon his throne. The scent of honeyed wine and roasting meats hung thick in the air, mingling with the perfumed sweat of dancers and the wood smoke from the great hearth. Eleanor's fingers trembled against the rough fabric of her simple dress as she kept her eyes downcast. A nobleman stumbled past, reeking of alcohol, his shoulder brushing against hers without acknowledgement. The laughter of the court felt like needles piercing her skin. Was she truly so beneath their notice? Something twisted inside her chest, a knot of regret and shame that made it difficult to breathe. She dared not look up, fearful her face would betray the storm raging within. The memory of her childish boldness now felt like a cruel joke played by fate itself. "You there, the new girl. Come forward!" The steward's voice cut through the din, sending a jolt through Eleanor's spine. Her legs moved mechanically, each step across the polished stone floor a testament to her determination not to trip, not to disgrace herself further. As she approached the raised dais where the nobles sat, she risked lifting her gaze, and immediately wished she hadn't. The king was staring directly at her, his crown catching the torchlight, his expression unreadable. Had 12 years changed her beyond recognition? Or did some flicker of memory stir behind those royal eyes? A muscle in his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. The noise of the feast receded into a distant hum. "My lord requires more wine," a serving woman hissed in her ear, shoving a silver pitcher into Eleanor's unprepared hands. The cold metal against her palms broke the spell. She bowed her head again and moved to serve, navigating between laughing courtiers who seemed not to see her at all. The weight of invisibility pressed upon her shoulders like a physical burden. As she approached the high table, her hands betrayed her with a slight tremble. One drop of wine spilled onto the pristine tablecloth, a crimson stain spreading like a tiny wound. She froze, horror washing over her face. "Clumsy girl," snapped a lady nearby. But the king raised his hand, silencing the criticism before it could gain momentum. "It is nothing," he said, his voice deeper than Eleanor remembered, yet somehow familiar. "Continue." She poured with renewed concentration, her eyes fixed on the stream of dark liquid rather than his face. Yet she could feel his gaze, searching, questioning. When she finished and began to retreat, his fingers brushed against hers as he took the goblet, a touch so brief it might have been accidental, yet precise enough to send electricity racing up her arm. Her breath caught, and for one dangerous moment, their eyes met fully. Time seemed to suspend itself. The raucous hall, the music, the hundreds of voices, all faded into nothingness, There was recognition there, lurking behind royal composure. A flicker of something that made Eleanor's heart seize in her chest. Did he remember? Could he possibly recall one insignificant village girl among the thousands of faces he must have seen? The thought was both terrifying and intoxicating. "You," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "Have we, Your Majesty?" A silken voice interrupted them. The foreign princess glided into view, resplendent in jewels and imported silk, her beauty cultivated and perfect as a winter rose. "The dance is beginning." Her possessive hand slipped through the crook of his arm, but her sharp eyes lingered on Eleanor for a heartbeat too long. The message was clear. Step back. Know your place. Eleanor retreated, feeling as though she'd been doused with cold water. The reality of her situation crashed down upon her shoulders. What madness had gripped her to think he might remember? What folly to feel anything at all? She was a servant, and in 3 days' time, he would marry the princess. The childhood promise was nothing but ash. Yet as she backed away, disappearing once more into the crowd of servants along the wall, she caught him looking over his shoulder, his expression troubled. For the briefest moment before duty pulled him away, the king's eyes sought hers across the crowded hall. There was hesitation there, confusion, perhaps even regret. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. She pressed a hand to her bodice, afraid the sound might give her away. The music swelled as the royal couple took their positions for the dance. Eleanor watched as they moved in perfect, practiced unison, the picture of royal harmony. But when the formation changed and they separated briefly, his gaze swept the hall, finding her instantly among dozens of similarly dressed servants. It was not chance. It was deliberate. As Eleanor slipped into the shadows of a stone column, her mind raced with possibilities too dangerous to name. Perhaps it was nothing, a king's idle curiosity. Perhaps it was everything. The feast continued around her in a blur of color and sound, but inside her chest, a tiny flame of hope had kindled, unwanted, unbidden, and unstoppable. Her childhood words echoed back to her, no longer a source of shame, but something else entirely. "When I grow up, I'll be your queen." And though reason told her to extinguish this foolish dream, the way he looked at her, with that slight, mysterious smile before turning back to his bride, it left a burning question that would consume her thoughts through the long night ahead. Was it merely coincidence, or was destiny finally beginning to awaken? Dawn broke over the castle walls with cruel indifference, spilling pale light through narrow windows and exposing the reality Eleanor had tried to deny throughout her restless night. The royal wedding preparations accelerated with each passing hour, and with them, her torment. The cold stone floor beneath her bare feet sent shivers up her spine as she hurried through the servants' corridor, arms laden with the princess's freshly laundered linens. Every corner of the massive fortress echoed with activity, hammers striking anvils in the courtyard, cooks shouting orders in steamy kitchens, messengers' boots clicking against stone, all a relentless reminder of her insignificance within these walls. "You're late," snapped Lady Beatrice, the sharp-faced woman who supervised the princess's ladies-in-waiting. Her bony fingers dug into Eleanor's arm as she pulled her into the royal chambers. "The princess has been asking for her mourning garments for nearly half an hour." Eleanor lowered her eyes, swallowing the knot in her throat. "Forgive me, my lady. The laundress was—" "I care nothing for your excuses," Lady Beatrice hissed, her breath smelling of sour wine and mint leaves. "Remember your position. There are dozens of village girls who would cut off their fingers for your place." The princess sat at her ornate dressing table, her golden hair catching the morning light as a senior handmaid brushed it with smooth, practiced strokes. In the polished silver mirror, her eyes flickered toward Eleanor, cold, calculating eyes that seemed to strip away all pretense. A shiver raced down Eleanor's spine that had nothing to do with the morning chill. "The plain one finally arrives," the princess remarked in her heavily accented voice, never turning from her reflection. "Come, dress me properly. Yesterday the embroidery scratched my skin." Eleanor approached with downcast eyes, carefully laying out the garments on the massive canopied bed. Her fingers, calloused from years of fieldwork before her unexpected appointment to the castle, brushed against silks worth more than her family's entire cottage. The unfairness of it all burned in her chest like swallowed fire. This woman, born to privilege, would soon have everything, including him. As Eleanor helped the princess into her undergown, the scent of exotic oils and perfumes nearly suffocated her. The other ladies chatted among themselves, exchanging gossip about which noble had danced with whom, which lord had drunk too much wine. They spoke as if Eleanor were invisible, a piece of furniture rather than a person with ears and a heart.
"I hear the king was distracted during last night's banquet,"
one lady whispered, just loud enough for Eleanor to catch.
"Lady Catherine swears she saw him watching one of the servants."
Eleanor's hands froze momentarily on the princess's lacing, her heart hammering so loudly she feared the others might hear it. "Nonsense," another replied with a tinkling laugh, "though His Majesty does have unusual tastes sometimes. Remember that common girl from his childhood village? They say he requested updates on her well-being for years." The princess's back stiffened beneath Eleanor's fingers. "Enough," she commanded, her voice sharp as a blade. "I tire of your prattle." The silence that followed pressed against Eleanor's ears like water. She focused on her task, threading laces through silver eyelets with trembling fingers, fighting to control her breathing. Could they be speaking of her? Had he truly asked about her over the years? The possibility sent waves of heat and cold alternating through her body. Later that morning, as Eleanor carried water to the princess's bath, she passed through the great hall where preparations for that evening's feast were underway. Servants scurried about, hanging new tapestries and polishing silver candelabras. She kept her eyes lowered, moving quickly past nobles who never bothered to step aside for serving girls. "Watch yourself," a gruff voice warned as she nearly collided with a tall figure. Eleanor stumbled backward, water sloshing dangerously close to the rim of her pitcher. She looked up, an apology ready on her lips, and found herself staring directly into the king's face. Time stopped. The bustling hall continued its activity around them, but Eleanor felt trapped in a pocket of silence, where only her thundering heart made any sound. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes that hadn't been there in childhood, the weight of responsibility etched into his features. But his eyes, those were the same eyes that had crinkled with laughter when she'd made her bold declaration years ago. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," she whispered, dropping into a hasty curtsy, water spilling onto the floor despite her care. He stared at her for one heartbeat, then two. Recognition flickered across his face, subtle but unmistakable. "No harm done," he said quietly. Then, glancing around to ensure no one was paying them attention, he added, "You're from Elmwood Village, aren't you?" The question struck her like lightning, he remembered. Not everything, perhaps, but enough. Eleanor's mouth went dry. "Yes, Your Majesty." A muscle worked in his jaw. "Eleanor, isn't it?" His voice was low, for her ears alone. The sound of her name on his lips nearly undid her. "Yes, Your Majesty." He seemed about to say more when a courtier approached, bowing deeply. "Sire, the ambassador from Nordland awaits your audience." The king's expression shuddered, royal mask sliding back into place. He nodded once to Eleanor, a gesture both dismissal and acknowledgement, before turning away. But in that brief moment of connection, something had passed between them, as tangible as a thread binding one soul to another. Eleanor continued her duties throughout the day in a daze, moving through the massive stone corridors like a sleepwalker. Every shadow, every doorway held the possibility of another encounter. Her body felt strangely weightless, as though she might float away if not anchored by the heaviness of the princess's demands. During the afternoon council meeting, she stood silently against the wall with other servants, ready to fetch documents or serve refreshments. Though she kept her gaze firmly on the floor, she could feel the king's awareness of her presence like heat from a nearby flame. Twice their eyes met across the room, brief connections severed immediately by protocol and circumstance. Each time, her heart leaped painfully against her ribs, making it difficult to breathe. As evening approached, bringing with it another elaborate feast, Eleanor helped prepare the princess for the banquet. The foreign woman seemed especially tense, snapping at her ladies over trivial matters, her eyes constantly darting to the window as if expecting some calamity to arrive with the setting sun. "You," she said suddenly, fixing Eleanor with a penetrating stare as the others busied themselves with her jewels. "Your hands are steadier than the others. You will serve me personally tonight at the high table." Eleanor cursed, hiding her alarm. "As you wish, Your Highness." The princess leaned closer, her perfume overwhelming in the small space between them. "I've noticed how the king looks at you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your eyes are too bold for someone of your station." Ice flooded Eleanor's veins. The accusation hung in the air between them, unspoken but clear as crystal. The princess knew, or at least suspected, and that knowledge was far more dangerous than any punishable offense. "I don't understand, Your Highness," Eleanor managed, struggling to keep her voice steady. The princess's smile never reached her eyes. "I believe you do." She turned back to her mirror, dismissing Eleanor with a wave. "Remember your place, girl. A servant who forgets herself quickly finds herself without a position, or worse." Eleanor backed away, heart racing with fear and something dangerously close to defiance. As she left the chamber to fetch the princess's evening slippers, she caught her own reflection in a passing window, cheeks flushed, eyes bright with unshed tears. The girl who had once boldly promised to become queen stared back at her, trapped behind glass and stone, surrounded by wealth she couldn't touch and power she couldn't claim. Yet somewhere in the labyrinth of the castle, he had remembered her name. Against all reason, against all propriety, the king had recognized her. And in that recognition lay both peril and possibility, a knife edge she now walked with every breath she took within these walls. Whispers followed Eleanor through the winding stone corridors like persistent shadows. 3 days had passed since the princess's veiled threat, and the castle had transformed into a hive of suspicious glances and hushed conversations that died whenever she approached. The massive tapestries depicting ancient battles seemed to watch her with their thread-woven eyes, witnesses to a game far more dangerous than she had ever imagined playing. "There she goes, the one who caught his eye," a kitchen maid murmured to her companion as Eleanor passed with a basket of fresh linens. They made no effort to lower their voices, as if her feelings were as inconsequential as those of the castle cats that hunted mice in the grain stores. "Bold little thing, isn't she? My cousin works in the East Wing and swears she saw them alone in the corridor." The second voice dripped with scandalous delight. Eleanor kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, her knuckles whitening around the basket handle. Each word cut deeper than any blade, not because they were cruel, but because they contained dangerous fragments of truth. The walls themselves seemed to absorb these stories, multiplying them in the echo chambers of servants' quarters and guard posts until the entire castle buzzed with speculation. In the great hall, where servants polished silver goblets for that evening's feast, 2 noblemen's voices carried across the room, unaware or uncaring that she could hear them clearly while arranging flowers at a nearby table. "The king seems restless these days," said one, a gray-bearded lord whose name Eleanor couldn't recall. "Distracted during council meetings, staring out windows when he should be listening to reports of border disputes." "Wedding nerves, nothing more," replied his companion, a portly man with jeweled rings on every finger. "Though I must say, the way he watches that serving girl is most peculiar. Perhaps he plans to exercise his royal privilege before settling into matrimony." Their laughter echoed off the vaulted ceiling, coarse and knowing. Heat rushed to Eleanor's cheeks as she crushed a delicate white blossom between her trembling fingers. She wanted to scream that it wasn't like that what passed between her and the king in those brief charged moments was something purer, something rooted in childhood memories and unspoken possibilities. But what did she truly know of his thoughts? Perhaps the nobleman spoke the truth. Perhaps she was nothing more than a momentary distraction, a commoner's novelty before he committed to his royal bride. The scent of roasting meat and baking bread from the kitchen mingled with the pungent oils used to polish armor that hung along the walls. These familiar castle smells, once merely background to her daily tasks, now seemed to carry whispered accusations on their currents. Eleanor's chest tightened as she finished the floral arrangements, each breath shallower than the last. "You there? The king wishes fresh rushes in his private study," called the head steward, a thin man whose suspicious eyes followed her everywhere lately. "Be quick about it. He returns from his ride shortly." Eleanor nodded, gathering her skirts as she hurried to the storage rooms where sweet-smelling rushes were kept. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was this a genuine request, or another opportunity for gossip to grow? The princess had kept her close these past days, rarely allowing her out of sight, perhaps to watch her, perhaps to torture her with proximity to wedding preparations. This unexpected errand felt simultaneously like freedom and danger. The king's study occupied a quiet corner of the castle's western tower, its windows overlooking the forest beyond the walls. Eleanor entered cautiously, a bundle of fresh rushes in her arms, the earthy scent rising around her like a shield. The room stood empty, sunlight streaming through leaded glass to illuminate shelves of bound manuscripts and maps. She worked quickly, gathering the old rushes and spreading new ones across the stone floor, trying to ignore the intimacy of being alone among his possessions. The quill still wet with ink, the half-filled wine goblet, the impression of his body still visible in the cushioned chair. "I thought it might be you." The voice from the doorway froze her in place. Eleanor turned slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs with such force she feared they might crack. The king stood framed in the arched entrance, still dressed in riding clothes, his hair damp with exertion. Without the formal regalia of court, he looked younger, more like the boy she had known in childhood. "Your Majesty," she managed, dropping into a curtsy so deep her knees nearly touched the rushes. "I was instructed to refresh your study." He closed the door behind him, a subtle action that sent panic and something darker, more forbidden, coursing through her veins. "Eleanor of Elmwood," he said quietly, her name in his mouth sounding like poetry rather than the simple village designation it was. "Do you remember the day you made that bold declaration to me?" The question hung in the air between them, impossible to ignore. Eleanor's throat constricted, making speech difficult. I do, Your Majesty, though I wish you would forget such childish impertinence." "Impertinence?" A smile played at the corners of his mouth, transforming his face from regal to almost boyish. "Is that what you call it? I've thought of it often over the years. The fierce little girl with leaves in her hair who looked me in the eye when everyone else bowed their heads." Eleanor's pulse quickened. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thick with unspoken things. "Your Majesty is too kind to remember such foolishness." "Not kind, truthful." He moved closer, close enough that she could smell the leather of his riding clothes, the faint scent of horses and forest air that clung to him. "The castle speaks of us, you know." "Yes, Your Majesty." Her voice emerged as barely more than a whisper. "And what do you make of these rumors?" His eyes searched hers, seeking something she wasn't sure she could safely give. "They are dangerous, Your Majesty." The words escaped before she could consider their wisdom. "For me, if not for you." His expression darkened, a flash of something like guilt crossing his features. "I've placed you in jeopardy without intending to." He turned away, moving to the window where he stood silhouetted against the afternoon light. "Perhaps it would be better if you were reassigned to another part of the castle, away from the princess's chambers, away from me." The suggestion felt like a physical blow. Eleanor's breath caught in her chest, pain blooming beneath her ribs. "If that is your wish, Your Majesty." "My wish?" He laughed, a sound without humor. "My wishes ceased to matter the day I took the crown, as yours ceased to matter the day you entered royal service." The bitter truth of his words hung between them, impossible to deny. Eleanor stood frozen, the bundle of discarded rushes still clutched in her arms, a physical barrier between their bodies that did nothing to protect her heart. "Yet still I find myself watching for you," he continued, his voice dropping lower. "In every corridor, at every feast, my eyes seek you out against my better judgment." A sound from the corridor outside, the heavy tread of guardsmen's boots, broke the fragile moment. The king straightened, royal mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. "You may go," he said, his voice once again formal, controlled. "Thank you for attending to the rushes." Eleanor cursed mechanically, backing toward the door, desperate to escape before her emotions betrayed her completely. As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her once more. "Eleanor." Her name alone, without title or ceremony. "Be careful." She nodded once, unable to trust her voice. and fled into the corridor where two guards stood at attention, their faces impassive but their eyes sharp with curiosity. Her cheeks burned with the knowledge of how this would appear, the king alone with a serving girl, the door closed between them and the rest of the world. By nightfall, this encounter would become another story whispered behind hands, another thread in the tapestry of gossip woven throughout the castle. As she hurried back to the servants' quarters, Eleanor passed the princess's ladies walking in the garden, their colorful silk gowns like exotic birds among the greenery. They fell silent as she passed, their eyes following her with undisguised suspicion. "The king asked for her specifically, you know," one said, voice carrying clearly across the courtyard, "for the rushes in his study. Passed over 3 other servants to request her by name." The implication hung in the air like poisonous smoke. Eleanor quickened her pace, but not before catching the cold, calculating gaze of the princess herself, who stood slightly apart from her ladies, watching Eleanor with the focused intensity of a hawk tracking a field mouse. In that moment, understanding crashed over Eleanor with terrifying clarity. The rumors weren't accidental. They were weapons, carefully crafted and strategically deployed. And she was caught in the center of a battle whose rules she barely comprehended, between powers she could never hope to match. The royal gardens glistened under a thin veil of morning mist, each dewdrop clinging to rose petals like tiny crystal jewels. Eleanor paused at the entrance, a small basket of medicinal herbs clutched against her apron. Something felt different about the air. The usual bustle of gardeners tending to the sculpted hedges and fruit trees was conspicuously absent. Only the occasional chirp of birds and the distant sound of the blacksmith's hammer broke the unnatural stillness. "By order of His Majesty, the gardens are closed to all servants and courtiers until midday," announced a royal guard, his polished breastplate catching the diffused sunlight. "The king desires solitude for contemplation before tonight's feast." Eleanor nodded respectfully, turning to leave, disappointment settling in her stomach like a cold stone. The herbs needed for the princess's headache remedy would have to wait. As she started back toward the castle's winding corridors, a familiar voice stopped her. "Wait, you there, lady's maid." She turned to find the king's personal attendant, an older man with kind eyes that contradicted his stern reputation. He beckoned her with a discreet motion, glancing over his shoulder to ensure they weren't observed. "His Majesty asks for someone to bring fresh linens to the garden pavilion," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the morning breeze that rustled through nearby branches. He specifically mentioned someone with knowledge of medicinal herbs. The man's eyes held hers meaningfully, making it clear this was no ordinary request. Eleanor's heart began a dangerous rhythm against her ribs, each beat sending waves of warmth and fear coursing through her veins. Surely one of the garden attendants. "They've all been dismissed for the morning." His expression remained neutral, but something in his tone suggested he understood more than he revealed. "The linen closet by the east staircase. Be quick about it." She stood frozen for a moment after he departed, the implications of this summons crashing over her like waves against shore rocks. The king had engineered this. A private meeting away from watchful eyes, disguised as an innocent service request. The boldness of it terrified her almost as much as the burning anticipation that spread through her chest. With trembling fingers, Eleanor collected fresh linens, her mind racing with possibilities and dangers. Each passing servant or noble in the corridors became a potential witness, their curious glances seemingly able to read her thoughts. The weight of whispered rumors that had circulated for days now felt magnified, as if the very stones of the castle walls could sense her intention to answer this forbidden summons. The garden, usually filled with courtiers strolling along gravel paths or servants tending to the elaborate flower beds, lay eerily deserted. Morning mist still clung to the lower shrubs, creating a dreamlike quality as Eleanor made her way toward the pavilion that stood at the center of the royal maze of hedges. The scent of roses, heavy with dew, mixed with the sharper notes of rosemary and thyme from the herb garden, creating an intoxicating perfume that seemed to heighten her already sensitive nerves. The pavilion came into view, a graceful structure of white stone with slender columns supporting a domed roof. Inside, partially obscured by billowing silk curtains that moved gently in the breeze, sat the king. He wore simpler clothing than his usual court attire, though the quality of the fabric and the royal signet ring on his finger left no doubt of his identity. He was alone, without guards or attendants, a startling breach of protocol that made Eleanor's pulse quicken further. "Your Majesty," she said softly, stopping at the entrance to the pavilion, the linens clutched before her like a shield. "I was told you required these." He looked up, his expression unguarded in a way she had never witnessed before. Without the weight of the crown or the scrutiny of the court, he seemed younger, more like the boy she had known in childhood, though the responsibility etched into the lines around his eyes remained. "Eleanor," he said, her name sounding different in the open air than it had within castle walls, freer somehow, unburdened by titles and stations. "Please enter." She stepped hesitantly into the pavilion, the stone floor cool beneath her thin shoes. The space between them seemed charged with unspoken words, possibilities that had no place in the ordered world of royal protocol. "Forgive the deception," he said, gesturing to the linens in her arms. "I needed to speak with you away from the eyes and ears that seemed to follow us everywhere within the castle." Eleanor placed the linens on a marble bench, her hands unsteady. "It's dangerous, Your Majesty. The princess is meeting with her father's emissaries this morning." His voice held a note of resignation. "We have perhaps half an hour before her ladies notice your absence." The mention of such a precise time frame struck Eleanor like a physical blow. He had planned this carefully, considering every detail, a fact that both thrilled and terrified her. What could be so important that the king of the realm would risk such impropriety? "The rumors grow worse each day," he continued, moving to stand at the pavilion's edge, looking out over the misty garden. "I've heard what they say about you, about us. I fear I've placed you in an impossible position." The morning light filtered through the silk curtains, casting dappled patterns across his face, revealing vulnerabilities the court never saw. Eleanor remained rooted in place, afraid to move closer, equally afraid to maintain distance. "They're just rumors, Your Majesty. They will pass when the wedding is over, and another scandal takes their place." The words tasted bitter on her tongue, each one a small betrayal of the truth that hummed between them. He turned to her, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made breathing difficult. "And if I don't want them to pass? If I find myself wishing for something different entirely?" The question hung in the air between them, dangerous and beautiful as lightning. Eleanor's chest tightened, her mouth dry with longing and fear. "Your Majesty mustn't say such things. You're to be married in less than a week. To seal an alliance, to satisfy the council, to do what kings must do." Frustration edged his voice as he paced the small confines of the pavilion. "Eleanor, do you remember the oak tree in your village, the one where you made that bold declaration?" The memory flooded her senses, the ancient oak with its sprawling branches, the summer sun dappling through leaves, the royal procession that had brought the young prince to their village. She had been just a child, 7 years old and fearless in the way only children can be, standing before his horse and announcing with absolute conviction that one day she would be his queen. "I remember," she whispered, the admission feeling like surrender. "I had it wrong then," he said, his voice dropping lower, meant only for her ears despite the empty garden surrounding them. "I laughed because I was a boy of 12 who thought he understood the world. I thought it impossible, a village girl becoming queen." He moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, smell the cedar and clove scent that clung to his clothing. "I didn't understand that some impossibilities haunt you long after you've dismissed them." The sound of distant voices, guards changing shifts perhaps, or gardeners being allowed to return, broke the spell between them. The king stiffened, instantly alert to the potential danger of discovery. "You should go," he said, though everything in his expression contradicted his words. "Return through the herb garden. The gate there leads to the servants' entrance." Eleanor cursed, preparing to leave, her mind spinning with all that had been said and all that remained unspoken. As she turned, his hand caught hers, a touch so forbidden that her breath stopped completely. "Eleanor." Her name sounded like a prayer on his lips. "Meet me here tomorrow, same time." She should have refused. Everything about this meeting violated every rule of her position, placed her at risk of dismissal or worse. Yet, looking into his eyes, seeing the same longing she felt reflected back at her, Eleanor found herself nodding once before pulling away. She hurried through the herb garden, the scent of crushed thyme rising from beneath her footsteps, her heart pounding with equal measures of exhilaration and terror. The stolen moment in the pavilion played over and over in her mind. His words, his proximity, the unmistakable meaning behind his invitation. As she re-entered the castle through a side door, Eleanor nearly collided with a figure in an elaborate gown of emerald silk. She dropped into a hasty curtsy, apologies already forming on her lips, until she looked up into the cold, calculating eyes of the princess. "There you are," the royal bride said, her accent more pronounced than usual, a sign of her agitation. "How curious. I was told you had gone to collect herbs for my headache remedy, yet here you come from the direction of the royal gardens, which have been closed by order of my betrothed." The accusation hung in the air between them, sharp as a drawn dagger. Eleanor's mouth went dry, her basket of herbs suddenly feeling like damning evidence rather than a simple prop. "Forgive me, Your Highness. I took a wrong turn and had to circle back." The lie sounded hollow, even to her own ears. The princess's eyes narrowed, sweeping over Eleanor's flushed cheeks and the slight tremble in her hands. "Indeed." The single word dripped with disbelief. "How fortunate for you that I am in a merciful mood today. You will attend me immediately for the fitting of my wedding gown." As Eleanor followed the princess down the corridor, she felt the weight of unseen eyes upon her, servants, guards, courtiers, all watching and whispering. The brief joy of the garden pavilion faded with each step, replaced by the cold reality of her position and the dangerous game she had agreed to continue tomorrow. The great hall blazed with the light of 1,000 candles, their golden glow reflecting off polished silver platters and crystal goblets. Eleanor moved through the packed chamber like a ghost, invisible despite the press of bodies, her plain servant's dress a stark contrast to the jewel-toned silks and velvets of the nobility. The feast to honor visiting dignitaries from the princess's homeland was in full revelry, musicians playing in the gallery above, jesters performing between tables, servants darting between guests with ever-flowing wine. The air hung heavy with the scents of roasted meats, spiced sauces, and the cloying perfumes of ladies who had applied their fragrances too liberally. Eleanor kept her eyes lowered as she refilled goblets at the lower tables, but her awareness of him burned like a physical sensation. The king sat at the head table on the raised dais, the princess beside him, both resplendent in matching garments of deep blue, trimmed with gold. From this distance, they appeared the perfect royal couple. Handsome, powerful, blessed by fortune and birth. The sight sent a dull ache through Eleanor's chest that she tried desperately to ignore. "More wine, if you please," called a red-faced baron, waving his empty goblet with the careless entitlement of the highborn. As Eleanor approached his table, she felt his gaze linger inappropriately on the bodice of her dress. "You're the one they whisper about, aren't you?" he asked, voice slurred with drink but still low enough that only those closest could hear. "The servant girl who's caught royal attention." Her hands trembled slightly as she poured, focusing intently on not spilling a drop. "I don't know what you mean, my lord," she murmured, the practiced response feeling like ashes on her tongue. "Come now," he persisted, his breath reeking of wine and garlic. "Half the castle speaks of it. The way he watches you when he thinks no one notices. The private garden meeting yesterday." He leaned closer, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that nonetheless carried to nearby ears. "They say you were childhood friends, that you once made a bold claim about becoming queen." Ice flooded Eleanor's veins. The fact that this particular detail had reached the nobility meant the rumors had grown far beyond harmless servant gossip. She straightened, clutching the wine pitcher against her chest like a shield, desperate to escape this dangerous conversation. "Forgive me, my lord, but I must attend to other tables." The baron laughed, the sound drawing attention from neighboring seats. Of course. Far be it from me to keep you from your duties." The suggestive pause sent nervous titters around the table, and Eleanor felt her cheeks burn with humiliation as she retreated. Above the general din of the feast, A sudden sharp sound of metal striking crystal rang out. The hall fell gradually silent as the king stood, goblet raised for a toast. Eleanor froze near a stone pillar, unable to continue her retreat without drawing notice. "Honored guests," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "We welcome our friends from across the Eastern Sea and celebrate the alliance that will be sealed with marriage in 3 days' time." Dutiful applause followed this statement, though Eleanor noted that the king's expression remained carefully neutral, his eyes not meeting those of his betrothed. From her position against the pillar, Eleanor had a clear view of both the high table and the assembled nobility. She saw the princess's practiced smile, the calculating assessment in her eyes as she scanned the crowd. She saw the court ladies whispering behind bejeweled hands, their gazes occasionally flicking toward Eleanor herself with poorly disguised curiosity. But most painfully, she saw the king's gaze constantly, almost unconsciously, searching the room until it found her. Brief connections severed immediately, yet occurring with such frequency that they could not possibly go unnoticed. A corpulent duke from the princess's homeland rose next, lifting his goblet in a meaty fist. "To our beautiful princess, who crosses the sea to unite our kingdoms." His booming voice carried a hint of challenge. "And to King William, who will surely treasure our greatest jewel as she deserves." Cheers erupted, goblets raised high, wine sloshing over rims in the enthusiasm of the moment. The king nodded acknowledgement, his smile not quite reaching his eyes as he raised his cup to his lips. "Speaking of treasures," continued the duke, his gaze suddenly, deliberately sweeping toward where Eleanor stood, "I hear your kingdom holds many unexpected gems, even among the common folk." The emphasis he placed on the last words left no doubt about his meaning. A hush fell over the nearest tables, the silence spreading outward like ripples in a pond. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat as dozens of eyes turned toward her. The wine pitcher in her hands suddenly felt impossibly heavy. The king's knuckles whitened around his goblet, but before he could respond, the princess laid a delicate hand on his arm, her voice carrying clearly through the expectant silence. "My dear Duke Ormond," she said sweetly, though her eyes remained cold, "in my future husband's court, we value all who serve faithfully, regardless of birth. It is one of the many admirable qualities of this kingdom." She turned to the king, her smile a perfect mask. "Isn't that so, my lord?" Trapped by protocol and hundreds of watching eyes, the king had no choice but to agree. "Indeed," he replied evenly. "Each person has their proper place and purpose." The words struck Eleanor like physical blows. Each person has their proper place. The reminder of the unbridgeable chasm between them, spoken in his own voice before the entire court, seemed to echo in her ears even as conversation gradually resumed around her. She backed away, desperate to escape the stifling air of the great hall, the pitcher clutched against her chest to hide her trembling hands. As she reached the servant's doorway, Eleanor made the mistake of looking back. The king's eyes met hers across the crowded room, a gaze so filled with unspoken apology and frustration that it nearly brought her to her knees. The princess, ever vigilant, noticed the exchange and leaned close to whisper something in his ear. Whatever she said caused a muscle in his jaw to tighten visibly, his expression hardening into the remote mask of royalty. In the relative quiet of the stone corridor outside, Eleanor pressed her forehead against the cool wall, struggling to master her emotions. The feast would continue for hours yet, and she would be expected to return, to serve wine with steady hands and downcast eyes, while pretending not to feel the weight of curious stares and malicious whispers. "They're calling you his castle sparrow now," came a voice from the shadows. Eleanor whirled to find Lady Beatrice watching her with an unreadable expression. A plain little bird that has somehow caught royal attention. Eleanor straightened, squaring her shoulders despite the fear coursing through her. People will gossip about anything to relieve the tedium of their lives. Indeed. The older woman stepped closer, her voice dropping to ensure they wouldn't be overheard by passing servants. But when gossip reaches the ears of foreign dignitaries, it becomes dangerous. The princess's family will not tolerate any threat to this alliance, real or perceived. "I am no threat," Eleanor insisted, though the words rang hollow even to her own ears. Lady Beatrice's expression softened marginally, something almost like pity crossing her features. My girl, intentions matter little in matters of politics and power. The mere appearance of impropriety is enough. She glanced toward the door leading back to the Great Hall. Return to your duties, but be warned. You tread a path more perilous than you know. Eleanor nodded stiffly and moved to follow the instruction, but Lady Beatrice caught her arm in a surprisingly strong grip. And stay away from the garden pavilion tomorrow, she added quietly. The princess has ordered additional guards placed there, ostensibly for security concerns. The implication was clear. The princess knew of their planned meeting. Eleanor's blood ran cold as she realized the extent of the danger. She managed a small nod of acknowledgement before returning to the feast, the warning echoing in her mind with each step. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of motion and sound. Eleanor moved automatically through her duties, pouring wine and clearing platters while keeping her eyes firmly fixed on her tasks. Yet she remained acutely aware of the king's presence, of the subtle ways his attention followed her movement through the hall, and of the princess's increasingly cold vigilance. As the feast reached its height, with minstrels playing lively tunes and couples rising to dance in the cleared center of the hall, Eleanor found herself near the high table, replacing empty platters with fresh ones. The Duke, who had nearly exposed her earlier, was regaling the royal couple with a loud tale of hunting exploits, his hands gesturing expansively as he described the kill. "A magnificent creature," he boomed, but in the end, like all prey, it made a fatal mistake. It trusted when it should have fled. The princess laughed, a tinkling sound with edges sharp as broken glass. How true, Duke Ormond. The wisest creatures know when they are outmatched and retreat before they are destroyed. Her eyes found Eleanor's across the table, the message unmistakable, not a threat, but a promise, cold, calculated, and absolute. Rain lashed against the castle walls, driven by a howling wind that seemed to give voice to the turmoil inside Eleanor's heart. The corridors were dimly lit by guttering torches, their flames dancing wildly each time a draft found its way through ancient stonework. Most of the castle's inhabitants had retreated to their chambers, seeking warmth and shelter from the unexpected summer storm. Only the occasional guard stood sentinel, cloaked figures barely discernible in the shadows between flickering light sources. Eleanor hurried along the eastern passage, a small lantern clutched in her trembling hand, her sodden cloak leaving a trail of rainwater behind her. She had been summoned to the princess's chambers to fetch a forgotten jewel box, a task that required her to cross nearly the entire castle. The storm had caught her returning from the laundry, where she had been reassigned following the previous night's feast. A not-so-subtle attempt to keep her away from the royal couple. Her hair clung to her face in damp tendrils, and her shoes squelched with each hurried step. As she rounded a corner near the portrait gallery, a hand emerged from the darkness, closing around her upper arm and pulling her into a recessed doorway. Eleanor nearly cried out in alarm before recognizing the king's familiar scent, cedar, clove, and something uniquely him. Her heart leaped painfully against her ribs as her eyes adjusted to the deeper darkness of their hiding place. "Forgive me," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the rain hammering against nearby windows. "I couldn't risk sending another message. The princess has my steward watched." Eleanor clutched her lantern with white-knuckled fingers, its feeble light casting strange shadows across his face. Gone was the composed monarch who had presided over last night's feast. In his place stood a man clearly tormented, his hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly, his eyes haunted by sleeplessness. "Your Majesty, we can't," she began, her voice catching in her throat. "I saw your face when I spoke those words at the feast," he interrupted, the pain in his voice unmistakable. "About everyone having their proper place. You must know I didn't mean." "But you spoke the truth," Eleanor whispered back, the words like stones in her mouth. "I am a servant. You are the king. This, whatever this is between us, it can never be." Thunder cracked outside, so close it seemed to shake the very foundations of the castle. In that brief, bright illumination from the accompanying lightning, Eleanor saw the raw emotion in his eyes, frustration, longing, and something dangerously close to desperation. "I can't continue this charade," he said, his hands moving to cradle her face with a tenderness that made her heart constrict painfully. Every day I sit in council meetings discussing border disputes and grain taxes while my thoughts are only of you. Every night I lie awake, remembering your voice, your eyes, that fearless girl who once promised to be my queen. Eleanor's breath hitched, her resolve weakening with each word. The warmth of his hands against her rain-chilled skin felt like the only real thing in a world gone mad. The wedding is in 2 days, she reminded him, her voice breaking on the final word. The alliance, your duty. I know my duty, he replied, the words emerging as if they physically pained him. I've known it since I was a child. Every moment of my life has been dictated by what is expected of a prince, a king. Just once. His voice dropped even lower, raw with emotion. Just once, I want to choose for myself. The enormity of his declaration stole the breath from Eleanor's lungs. Outside their hidden alcove, footsteps approached, the measured tread of castle guards making their rounds. They both froze, barely daring to breathe as the patrol passed within arm's reach of their hiding place. When the footsteps faded, the king continued, his words tumbling out as if he feared he might never get another chance to speak them. Come away with me. Tonight. The audacity of the suggestion, a king abandoning his throne, his betrothed, his duty, was so shocking that Eleanor momentarily wondered if she had misheard. What? I have loyal men who would help us reach the western coast by dawn. A ship waits there that could take us across the sea to lands where no one knows my face or name. His eyes searched hers in the dim lantern light, looking for any sign that she might agree to this mad plan. We could live simply, anonymously. I would trade my crown for that chance without hesitation. Eleanor's mind reeled with the implications. This was no idle fantasy, but a plan he had clearly considered in detail. The knowledge that he had gone so far, risked so much even in the contemplation of such an escape, both thrilled and terrified her. You cannot mean this, she whispered, though part of her desperately hoped he did. You would abandon your kingdom? For a servant girl? For you, he corrected, his thumb gently tracing the curve of her cheek. For Eleanor of Elmwood, who sees William the man, not just the crown he wears. The sound of her name alongside his, both stripped of titles, hung in the air between them, an intimacy more profound than any physical touch. For one wild moment, Eleanor allowed herself to imagine it. A cottage by the sea, simple clothes instead of royal regalia, days spent in honest work rather than court intrigue. A life built on love rather than duty. They would hunt us, she said, reality intruding on the beautiful fantasy. Your council, the princess's family, they would never simply let you disappear. Let them try. There was steel in his voice now, the determination of a man who had made his decision. I've spent my life learning statecraft and warfare. I know how to vanish if I choose to. Another crack of thunder, another flash of lightning illuminating his face, so earnest, so certain. Eleanor felt something breaking inside her chest, walls she had carefully constructed crumbling in the face of his unwavering resolve. This isn't just about us, she tried one last time, though her resistance was weakening with each passing moment. What of your people, the alliance that would protect them from the northern invaders? His expression darkened momentarily. My cousin has a stronger claim to the throne than most know. He is a good man, a capable leader. The alliance can be renegotiated through his marriage instead. He had an answer for everything, had clearly spent countless hours considering every objection, every consequence. The realization that he had thought so deeply about a future with her sent waves of conflicting emotions crashing through Eleanor's heart. I need your answer, he said softly, his hands still framing her face as if she were something infinitely precious. Not as your king who commands, but as a man who asks. Will you come with me? Time seemed suspended in that moment. The world narrowed to just the two of them hidden in darkness while rain lashed at stone walls and thunder rolled across the night sky. Eleanor's entire life, her family in the village, her position in the castle, her identity as a loyal subject, balanced against the love that had grown from a childhood dream into something so powerful, it threatened to consume her entirely. Yes, she whispered, the word escaping before she could reconsider. Yes, I will come with you." The transformation of his expression was like watching the sun break through storm clouds, disbelief giving way to joy so profound it seemed to illuminate him from within. Without warning, he pulled her against him, his lips finding hers in a kiss that obliterated every remaining doubt. For one perfect moment, the future seemed clear and bright despite the raging storm. Then, with terrible suddenness, light flooded their hiding place as the alcove door was yanked open from behind. "Well," came the princess's cold voice, each syllable dripping with venom. "What an interesting discovery." Eleanor jerked away from the king, her back hitting the stone wall as her lantern clattered to the floor, extinguished in an instant. In the harsh light from the princess's attendants' torches, she saw a tableau of shocked faces, guards with hands on sword hilts, ladies in waiting with expressions ranging from scandalized to secretly delighted, and at the center, the princess herself, magnificent in her fury. "Your Majesty," the princess continued, addressing the king with mocking formality, "when my lady reported that you had been seen skulking through the corridors like a common thief, I scarcely believed it. How unfortunate to find my disbelief misplaced." The king straightened to his full height, royal authority reasserting itself in his bearing despite the compromising situation. "This is a private matter, Princess Catherine." "Private?" She laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "A king's actions are never private, especially not when he is caught embracing a serving girl 2 days before his royal wedding." Her gaze shifted to Eleanor, contempt evident in every line of her face. "As for you, your position in this castle is, naturally, terminated. Whether further punishment is required remains to be seen." Eleanor stood frozen, unable to speak or move as her world collapsed around her. The king stepped forward, placing himself between her and the princess's venomous stare. "You will not harm her," he said, his voice carrying the unmistakable weight of royal command. "This is my responsibility alone." The princess's eyes narrowed, calculating even in her anger. "Indeed it is, Your Majesty, and I wonder how your council will respond when they learn of your indiscretion. How your people will react to a king who would abandon his duty for a common—" "Enough." His interruption was quiet, but carried such authority that even the princess fell silent. "We will discuss this elsewhere. Guards, escort the princess to my private council chamber. Ladies, return to your quarters. Now." For a moment it seemed the princess might refuse, but something in the king's expression convinced her to comply, for now. As she turned to leave, she cast one final poisonous glance at Eleanor. "Remember this moment, little sparrow," she said softly. "This is the night your dreams died." The silence that followed the princess's departure hung in the air like the aftermath of a battle, heavy with unsaid words and the acrid scent of destruction. Eleanor stood motionless in the alcove, her back pressed against cold stone, the echo of that final threat. "This is the night your dreams died," reverberating through her mind. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the castle, rain hammering against leaded windows, while lightning periodically illuminated the corridor in harsh white flashes. "Eleanor," the king's voice had lost its commanding edge, replaced by a quiet urgency that pulled her from her stunned stupor. "We don't have much time. The guards will return for you once they've escorted the princess to my chambers." She looked up at him, reality crashing down upon her with crushing force. "It's over," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. "Everything is over." His hands gripped her shoulders, warm and solid in a world that seemed to be dissolving around her. "Listen to me. Nothing has changed. We leave tonight as planned. The Western Road, the ship. It's our only chance now." Eleanor shook her head, unable to process the magnitude of what had just transpired. "You can't still be considering." "I'm not considering. I'm deciding." His voice held that familiar note of royal authority, softened only by the tenderness in his eyes. "The princess has seen to it that there is no middle path left. If we stay, you will face consequences I cannot fully protect you from, and I will be forced into a marriage now tainted by public scandal." A crack of thunder punctuated his words, so powerful it seemed to shake the foundations of the castle itself. Eleanor's mind raced with terrifying clarity, Servants dismissed for far lesser offenses were often left destitute, forced into beggary or worse. And the princess's family, with their reputation for ruthless elimination of obstacles, would hardly allow her to simply walk away with knowledge that could embarrass them. "What of your counsel? Your responsibilities?" she asked, clinging to reason even as her heart urged her to flee with him that very moment. "My cousin arrives tomorrow for the wedding festivities. He's a better man than I, steadier, less prone to following his heart." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "The succession can be arranged, the alliance renegotiated." Another flash of lightning revealed the fierce determination in his eyes, and Eleanor realized he had truly considered every aspect of this decision. This was no impulsive flight of fancy, but a carefully weighed choice, perhaps the first truly free choice of his royal life. "Meet me at the old well behind the armory at midnight," he continued, his voice dropping lower as footsteps approached from the far end of the corridor. "Bring nothing that would mark you as a castle servant. Wear the plainest clothes you have." Eleanor nodded, her heart pounding so violently she could feel it in her throat. The footsteps grew louder, guards returning, no doubt, to collect her for whatever punishment awaited. "Go now," he urged, pressing something into her palm. A small dagger in a leather sheath. "Take the servants' passage behind the kitchens. Stay out of sight until midnight." Their fingers intertwined briefly, a touch that conveyed more than words ever could. Then Eleanor slipped away, moving silently down the corridor in the opposite direction from the approaching guards, the dagger clutched against her chest like a talisman. The servants' quarters were mercifully empty when she arrived, everyone still occupied with their duties despite the late hour. Eleanor moved with quiet efficiency, gathering only what was absolutely necessary: a change of clothes, a small loaf of bread she'd saved from her dinner, the carved wooden bird her father had made for her before she left for castle service. Each item represented a piece of her life she was preparing to leave behind. As she changed into her plainest dress, a simple brown woolen garment with no castle insignia, a soft knock at the door froze her in place. For one terrible moment she imagined guards come to drag her away. Instead, the door creaked open to reveal Lady Beatrice, her normally stern face softened by an emotion Eleanor couldn't immediately identify. "I suspected I would find you here," the older woman said, stepping inside and closing the door quietly behind her. "The entire castle buzzes with what happened. The princess is demanding your immediate arrest for—" She paused, lips pressing into a thin line. "For impropriety with the king." Eleanor's fingers fumbled with the ties of her cloak. "I was just preparing to leave." "To flee, you mean?" Lady Beatrice's sharp eyes missed nothing, taking in the small bundle of belongings and the changed clothing. "With him." There seemed no point in denying it. Eleanor nodded once, chin raised in defiance even as fear coursed through her veins. She expected condemnation, perhaps even the summoning of guards. Instead, Lady Beatrice sighed, suddenly looking older and wearier than Eleanor had ever seen her. "I was once like you," she said softly, moving to help Eleanor with the stubborn clasp of her cloak. "Young, in love with a man far above my station. I thought nothing could stand in the way of true feeling." Eleanor stared at her, shocked by this unexpected confession. What happened? Reality happened. Duty happened. Lady Beatrice's fingers worked deftly at the clasp, avoiding Eleanor's gaze. "I chose safety over passion. Some days I regret it. Some days I know it was the only possible choice." The admission hung in the air between them, charged with decades of unspoken emotion. Outside, the storm seemed to be abating somewhat, the thunder now a distant rumble rather than the immediate crashing of earlier. "The princess has stationed guards at every castle gate," Lady Beatrice continued, her practical nature reasserting itself. "And she has described you to them in great detail. Your hair." She reached out, fingering a lock of Eleanor's distinctive auburn tresses. "It will betray you immediately." Before Eleanor could respond, Lady Beatrice produced a small pair of shears from her pocket. "May I?" Understanding dawned with a mixture of gratitude and grief. Eleanor nodded, sinking onto a small stool as the older woman began carefully cutting away the long hair that had been her pride since childhood. Each snip of the shears felt symbolic, severing ties to her past, to the life she had known. "The king," Eleanor began hesitantly as locks of hair fell around her shoulders. Will he truly be allowed to abdicate? To simply disappear? Lady Beatrice's hands paused momentarily. Kings do not simply do anything, child. If he chooses this path, there will be consequences. Political, perhaps even military. But, she resumed cutting, her tone softening slightly. His cousin has long been favored by many on the council. A smooth transition is not impossible. As the impromptu haircut neared completion, Lady Beatrice stepped back to assess her work. It will do, she declared, brushing stray hairs from Eleanor's shoulders. With a cap pulled low, you could pass for a young stable hand in the dark. Eleanor raised a hand to her head, feeling the strange lightness where her heavy tresses had been. The physical transformation seemed to make the enormity of her decision suddenly, terrifyingly real. I'm afraid, she admitted in a whisper. Lady Beatrice's expression softened further. You should be. Fear keeps us alive when we walk dangerous paths. She reached into the folds of her dress and withdrew a small pouch that clinked softly with the unmistakable sound of coins. Take this. Not enough to draw attention, but enough to help if... She hesitated. If things don't go as planned. Eleanor accepted the unexpected gift with trembling hands. Why are you helping me? The older woman's eyes grew distant, looking back across years to some private memory. Perhaps I'm giving you the chance I never took. She straightened, her moment of sentimentality passing. Or perhaps I simply believe that even kings deserve one true choice in their lives. A bell tolled somewhere in the distance, 10 chimes marking the hour. Eleanor gathered her meager belongings, securing the coin pouch and dagger beneath her cloak. 2 hours until the meeting at the well. 2 hours to evade detection in a castle now actively searching for her. Lady Beatrice moved to the door, checking the corridor before turning back one last time. The old gardener's tunnel beneath the east wall. It hasn't been used in years, but it will take you outside the castle grounds without passing any gates. She pressed a small iron key into Eleanor's palm. This will open the grate. Words of gratitude seemed wholly inadequate for such unexpected kindness. Eleanor embraced the older woman briefly, the gesture conveying what speech could not. Go now, Lady Beatrice said, her customary briskness returning. And Eleanor? She paused, something like hope flickering in her tired eyes. May you find happiness, whatever comes. With that blessing echoing in her mind, Eleanor slipped into the shadowed corridor, her heart pounding with equal measures of terror and exhilaration. Ahead lay either freedom or ruin, love or loss, a new beginning or a bitter end. The castle that had once seemed a prison of protocol and station now felt like a battlefield she must navigate one final time. The storm had subsided to a gentle rainfall, a silver curtain illuminated by occasional flashes of distant lightning. As Eleanor moved silently through the labyrinthine passages of the only home she had known for years, a strange calm settled over her. Whatever awaited at midnight by the old well, she would face it not as a servant bound by station, but as a woman who had made her choice with open eyes and full heart. Sunlight streamed through the weathered canvas awning of the village market, casting dappled patterns across baskets of fresh produce and handcrafted wares. Eleanor adjusted the simple linen headscarf that covered her cropped hair, her eyes instinctively scanning the crowded marketplace, a habit formed during 6 tense months of watching for royal guards in every shadow and unfamiliar face in every crowd. The coastal village of Brackenmere lay so far from the capital that news traveled slowly, arriving in fragments carried by merchant ships and wandering minstrels. Still, she never fully relaxed her vigilance. 2 copper pennies for the finest turnips in the southern coast, called the root vegetable merchant, his weathered face breaking into a smile as Eleanor approached. Ah, Mistress Nell, your father's cough. Is it improving with that honey mixture I suggested? Eleanor nodded, returning his smile while selecting several firm turnips for the evening's stew. Much better, Master Thorne. He even managed to work at his carpentry for 3 hours yesterday. The lie came easily after months of practice, the fictional ailing father providing a convenient explanation for her arrival in the village and her preference for a quiet life. The winter had passed into spring, and spring was now blossoming into early summer. Half a year since that rain-soaked night when she had slipped through the castle's forgotten tunnel, heart pounding with terror and hope in equal measure. Half a year since she had waited by the old well, the appointed hour of midnight coming and going with no sign of the king. Half a year of wondering, worrying, and finally, painfully, accepting. "You're far away today, Nell," observed the herb seller, a kindly woman who had taken Eleanor under her wing when she first arrived in the village. "Bad dreams again?" Eleanor forced her attention back to the present, shaking her head. "Just thinking of what herbs I need for Father's tonic." She selected bundles of thyme and rosemary, adding them to her market basket alongside the turnips. The scents mingled with the salt air that perpetually drifted from the harbor, creating an aroma uniquely Brackenmere, nothing like the perfumed corridors of the castle she had once called home. As Eleanor moved through the market, exchanging pleasantries with villagers who had come to accept her as one of their own, a commotion near the harbor drew everyone's attention. A royal messenger on horseback, his purple and gold livery instantly recognizable, had arrived at full gallop and was now surrounded by curious villagers eager for news from the capital. "Make way," he called, unrolling a scroll with official-looking seals dangling from its edges. "By order of His Majesty King Philip, first of his name, ruler of the United Realms." Eleanor froze, her basket nearly slipping from suddenly numb fingers. King Philip, not William. Her heart stuttered in her chest as she edged closer to the growing crowd, desperate to hear every word, yet terrified of what might be revealed. "His Royal Majesty invites all loyal subjects to celebrate the birth of the royal heir, Prince Edmund, born to Queen Catherine on the 15th day of the previous month. 3 days of feasting are declared throughout all provinces and holdings of the realm." The crowd erupted in cheers. A royal birth was cause for celebration even in the most remote villages, promising tax exemptions and public festivities. Eleanor stood motionless amid the jubilant crowd, the messenger's words echoing in her mind with devastating clarity. King Philip, Queen Catherine, Prince Edmund. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. She had known, of course, that William had not come that night, had assumed he had been prevented somehow, perhaps even imprisoned temporarily by his own council. During her first months in Brackenmere, she had maintained the fragile hope that he might still seek her out, might still choose love over duty as he had sworn to do. But this was the final confirmation that he had chosen differently, had married the princess after all, had accepted the crown again under a new regnal name, had fathered a child with the woman who had threatened to destroy Eleanor. "You look pale as sea foam, girl," said a concerned voice beside her. The fishmonger's wife, a motherly woman with weather-beaten skin, peered up at Eleanor's face with worry. "Come sit before you faint dead away." Eleanor allowed herself to be led to a wooden bench beneath a gnarled apple tree at the market's edge, her legs moving mechanically while her mind remained trapped in the devastating implications of the messenger's announcement. 6 months. 6 months during which she had been hiding, waiting, starting a humble new life built on the shattered remains of impossible dreams, while he had been ruling, wedding, continuing the bloodline that had always been his destiny. "Drink," the fishmonger's wife insisted, pressing a cup of watered cider into Eleanor's trembling hands. "News from the capital always sets hearts racing, doesn't it? Especially when it involves those fancy royal folk who seem to live in a different world from simple people like us." If only she knew, Eleanor thought bitterly, taking a sip of the tart liquid. The royal world that seemed so distant to these villagers had once been her daily reality, its splendor, its cruelty, its impossible constraints, and its king, who had held her face between his hands and sworn that he would choose her over everything else, had apparently returned to it without a backward glance. "Thank you," she managed, forcing a weak smile. "The heat must have affected me more than I realized." The woman patted her hand sympathetically before returning to her market stall, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts beneath the dappled shade. Around her, the village continued its celebrations, already discussing plans for the mandated 3 days of feasting. Children chased each other through the market square, squealing with delight at the prospect of special treats and suspended chores. Eleanor watched them with a curious detachment, as if observing a scene from behind thick glass. The pain she had expected, the crushing agony of final confirmation, refused to manifest. Instead, a strange, hollow calm settled over her. Perhaps she had always known this would be the outcome. Perhaps, deep down, she had never truly believed that a king could abandon everything for a servant girl, no matter what pretty words were whispered in darkened alcoves. As the afternoon lengthened and the celebration in the market square grew more boisterous, Eleanor gathered her purchases and began the walk back to her small cottage at the village's edge. The path wound alongside flowering meadows where bees darted between blooms and birds called to one another from swaying tree branches. Nature continued its eternal cycles, indifferent to human heartbreak. Her cottage came into view. A humble structure with a thatched roof and small garden, purchased with Lady Beatrice's coins and maintained with income earned from selling herbal remedies and offering basic medical care to villagers. It was a far cry from the magnificent castle where she had once served, yet it was hers alone, a freedom she had never known before. As she approached her gate, Eleanor noticed something unusual. A piece of parchment nailed to the wooden post, its edges fluttering in the gentle sea breeze. Her heart rate quickened as she tore it free, recognizing neither the handwriting nor the unmarked wax seal that had secured it. The message was brief, without signature or greeting. For the girl who once promised to be queen, your king never forgot. The crown was taken, not given. Look to the western horizon at sunset tomorrow. Eleanor read the words 3 times, her fingers trembling so violently that the parchment crackled. What cruel jest was this? What enemy had tracked her to this quiet village after so many careful months of anonymity? Yet even as suspicion flared, hope, that most persistent and dangerous of emotions, flickered to life in her chest. She recalled Lady Beatrice's final words to her. Kings do not simply do anything. What if there was more to the story than a messenger's proclamation? What if the royal announcement concealed complexities that simple village folk would never understand? The setting sun cast long shadows across her small garden as Eleanor entered her cottage. The mysterious note clutched against her heart. She moved through her evening routine mechanically, lighting candles, preparing a simple meal, arranging her herbs for drying, all while the words echoed in her mind like a half-remembered dream. Your king never forgot. As darkness settled over the coastal village, Eleanor stood in her doorway, gazing toward the western horizon where the last remnants of daylight were fading into the sea. Tomorrow's sunset seemed an eternity away, yet simultaneously terrifyingly immediate. Whatever or whoever awaited her, there would answer the question that had haunted her for 6 long months. Had she been abandoned, or had something else entirely occurred on that stormy night when dreams and duty collided? The girl who had once boldly declared, "When I grow up, I'll be your queen," to a laughing prince had long since vanished, replaced by a woman who understood the brutal realities of station and power. Yet as stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Eleanor felt a curious lightness spreading through her chest. Not quite hope, not quite peace, but something that felt strangely like the prelude to both. She closed her cottage door against the night air, securing the latch with deliberate care. For the first time in 6 months, she slept without dreams of castle corridors or royal betrayal. And when dawn broke over the eastern hills, she rose with a single certainty burning in her heart. Whether for final closure or miraculous reunion, the western horizon at sunset would bring an end to waiting. True royalty, Eleanor had learned, was not found in crowns or castles, but in the courage to face whatever fate delivered, with head high and heart open, regardless of the cost.